Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to your favorite 3M channel and to this latest episode. Tonight, I have Blues Brothers, but I think they're more like Burgundy Brothers. I welcome them, and they'll be joining me talking about this wonderful topic of reading and writing or storytelling fiction as a Christian. So, Chase, I have the honor to welcome you for the first time, brother. Welcome. And then, Joshua, you're my right hand of the channel. You're always welcome to come back, brother. But, Chase, can we please first start with you? Can you please tell us something about your spiritual and theological background? And then, Josh, you. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for having me on the channel. I know it's finally being able to come on the channel and actually, guest on it. So I'm very appreciative of that. So my name is Chase. I was born in California, raised here in Texas, and I was raised in a Christian home. We were pretty like non-denominational kind of people, but which is basically a Baptist, but it's fine. But that's basically what it is. But and we had a bit of a falling out in our family in terms of like our Christian faith. Stopped going to church when I was 12, 13 years old, something like that. And I hadn't been to church in years and years and years, and finally kind of got a bit of a shaking up in the family, as it were, that kind of got me coming back to church. And that was around when I was like 22, 23 years old. And I became intensely concerned with my own station or my own status before God, whether I was righteous or not, whether I was um, uh, justified or not. I became very concerned with that. And that just launched me into just going to church every single Sunday, getting involved in the church stuff. And I've struggled with it for years, but the Lord has been just always gracious to me. And so that kind of that's just the very general broad understanding of how my Christian journey really began. I like to put it like this, like for all my entire youth, I grew up reading John 3:16, but never did it impact me until later on in life, where it felt like I read it for the first time. It's like, oh, that's for me. God so loved that. That's for me. He loved me, like gave his only begotten son for me, and so that's when that suddenly hit. So that's kind of my general Christian background to where I am today. It's been a journey of just ups and downs, and just so, but the Lord is good always, and so here I am today. So it's my general story.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh man, yeah, this is cool to have Chase here finally. Um, I don't know if anybody who's listening remembers from the first episodes, but we both shouted out to Chase for connecting. He was the one that recommended that Nico should reach out to me. So this is actually really cool to see this come full circle. This continuity is really.
And it's funny because like I thought you two already knew each other, so I didn't like bother. Like, and I told Nico, I was like, hey, you should, because Nico, when he asked me to join, I was like Josh would love this. So I was like, I don't know if Josh is too busy with stuff, but I'll just, hey, you should go just try to talk to Joshua. And so Nico's like, him. I was like, oh yeah, oh look, you guys aren't friends, but you guys should totally be friends. And so yeah, that's how that started. So
And right, you were.
I know. I was like, Josh would be perfect for stuff like this.
Oh
So
man.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Josh, even though everyone knows everything about you, but do you mind please introducing yourself again? It doesn't hurt, bro.
Yeah, well, there's probably somebody who's listening to this for the first time, and welcome. My name's Josh. I'm from also born in California, but I never moved to Texas because I haven't yet reached the promised land. But I
Mhm.
I I love I love theology. I love philosophy. I love psychology. I love creativity. I love art. I love the arts, as in music and creation with medium, sculpting, things like that. I work with my hands. I do maintenance, but I by trade was an electrician. So I have a lot of things that make these things that are aesthetic abstractions like art and beauty really rubber meets the road for me. So this is one of those things where I like to have a worldview that can be holistic and encapsulate all of those different aspects together. And I am firmly of a believer that Christianity makes the most sense of the world. It not only makes the most sense of the world, it makes the most meaning and purpose of my life and gives me a direction to follow, and not just a direction, but a way, and not just a way, but a person. And that allows me to love and not just to do. And so I love Christianity. I grew up in the church also, and I have uh, come to make several drastic mind changes about the way that I learned, about the way that I understood and believed and read and interpreted scripture. And I have an affinity for trying to find similarities and differences between things. So I've spent the last few years studying Christian symbolism and the differences between the Eastern and Western church. And I grew up Protestant, but am now something of a theological mutt. And I currently attend a non-denominational church, aka Hidden Baptist Church, whatever.
Yeah.
I love my church family, and they bless me so much all of the time. My pastor is brilliant, and he's been a fantastic influence for me. And he's one of the reasons why I feel so confident learning about the scripture and not feeling like it's under attack when I don't understand something, because God is bigger than my misunderstandings. And so that's where I am theologically.
Thank you, both of you. Yeah, I also want to say thank you, Chase, for connecting me with Joshua. It's been really a pleasure and a blessing, and he helped me a lot with running some technological things on the channel. So I'm really thankful both for that, but also because we call him Golden Lips and Gandalf. There's also there's this wisdom coming out from him. Actually, I'm proud of myself. I came up with that Golden Lips nickname for him. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you mentioned the way, I'm like, maybe I shouldn't change the name of the channel because of,
Ah,
Yeah.
I'm like, I think I'll still keep it with 3M, but like, this is the way. It's a good alternative.
you could adopt
Okay.
it as a slogan at least.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we
Or
started
the way is a person.
Yeah, we started that. That's the people of the way. That's what they were called in the beginning at the very first
Correct.
early
Exactly.
church.
I think Mandalorian is a hidden Christian or something like that.
Yeah, something, man. Yeah.
Well, in the second season, I hate to spoil. I actually don't care, so I don't want to say I hate to spoil. I don't care if I spoil.
Go for
But in
it.
in the third season for Mandalorian, he's going to be baptized in the living water. So I'm like, what? Like, that's so Christian. That's so biblical.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay. So when it comes to tonight's topic of reading and writing or storytelling fiction as a Christian, I'm particularly excited. First, because not everyone knows, but a couple of years ago or a few years ago, I started this theological fantasy, action, adventure, whatever novel, which I didn't write in a while because I've been so busy with life, especially with school. But I do plan to continue and finish one day. So that's one of the things as an author who is still not published because I still didn't finish my work, but I'm interested in this topic as a future author. But also because whenever I look and turn, people around me, at least in my vicinity, they're not necessarily engaged in studying and reading so much. I tend to split people when it comes to some personalities into two groups. I would call those who are like super outgoing, super extroverted. I would call them explorers, and I would call those who are more nerdy, like to read and study. I would call them seekers. Let's say something like that. Even though one doesn't have to contradict each other, you can be both. But I noticed a while ago that I belong more to this latter group. And by analyzing and seeing what people around me do, how they spend their free time and stuff, I just noticed that they're either staying away from anything fictional or they're just not interested. So that's another thing that excites me tonight, that we can speak about fantasy or sci-fi from Christian perspective, how we can see godly messages, just the one I mentioned in Mandalorian season 3, but it's not just that one. We can see many other works of fiction, be it novels or comic books, um, even video games,
I
right?
was
We
gonna
can
I was
see,
gonna say that. Yeah, video games.
yeah, we can see, and for me, it's beautiful when we can find, we can dissect something and say, hey, I know this because it reminds me so much of the Bible, or it reminds me so much of Jesus. And for me, that's so beautiful when you find those just that treasure, like you're digging in a mine and you find all these precious stones. So for me, that's what it does to like my heart. It makes me so happy when I find those little things. But yeah, that's when it comes to me. I wanted to ask you, gentlemen, and again, Chase, we can start with you. What makes you excited? What makes you passionate when it comes to both writing and storytelling fictional stories as a Christian?
Well, a lot of them are the same reasons as yours. I've really liked to look at and my sort of my blueprint, I guess, is scripture. I when I read scripture, um, and especially like I've been doing some stuff in Old Testament, New Testament concepts and stuff. Old Testament symbolisms and New Testament fulfillments and stuff like that. The temple and things like that. And what I see is God as the greatest storyteller ever. And here we have this story of Scripture, and God uses a lot of stuff in the Old Testament, and then has a fulfillment motif in the New Testament. It's like, again, for me right now, I'm thinking about the temple itself or the tabernacle. You have the tabernacle in the Old Testament, and then of course you have which is where God dwelled among His people in the Old Testament, and then of course when that tabernacle is a prototype, as it were, or a symbol of Christ, who's God dwelling with us as a man in human form. That's what John 1's talking about. He tabernacled. The word became flesh, or the word tabernacled among us, basically, is what it means. So there's just a lot of these cool little concepts. It's almost like breaking down a complex thing into a simple little idea and telling a story through that. And of course, you have Jesus does that, like with his parables. He takes, there's so many things you can get from his parables, which are just simple little stories, and yet there's all kinds of stuff in the parables themselves, and yet they're just really simple stories. And so that's one of the reasons why I find storytelling interesting, because if you can take something that may be sort of complex and then explain it through a story, it might help people like understand things better. I think we more people than who would like to admit can process things better in storytelling formats. I know I do. I certainly do. Learning about the gospel, even in C.S. Lewis's writings, his own stories. In the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was like that helps explain a lot. Like, wow, okay, that's a cool way to look at it. And again, that takes us back to Jesus and his parables. Oh, that's a cool way to look at it. And then just small little analogies here and there, just like helping to explain. Like financially, I'm just absolutely terrible. Like I'm numbers, but that stuff confuses me. I'm really bad at that stuff. But when people explain a financial concept to me, like in a story, like I go, oh, why didn't you do that a long time ago? That fixed it all for me. Like, okay, that I get it now, kind of thing like that. So all that to basically say that storytelling has a way, and it is an art, but it has a way of it can take something that can be complex and not reduce it, but make it understandable for broader audiences and stuff. So that's really one of the reasons why I love storytelling. And there's a couple of other reasons, but and that specific issue, like what you were asking, but that's kind of really the basis for me, why storytelling is really interesting to me, other than, again, scripture just being a great model for it, so.
So I guess it's my turn. So for me, I'm sitting here nodding my head like, yeah, everything you're saying. I I fully agree. And even echoing something I've said on this channel probably 3-4 times already. Storytelling is the main method of the transmission of wisdom and understanding from generation to generation, from person to person, from speaker to audience, from visual and aesthetic experience. Like you can find meaning, and this is something that I talked about with Chase on my own podcast, was about a tree that he had seen or something, and it was like, this tree, it's huge and it's beautiful, but it's right next to the running water. It's like that living, that moving water, right? And so for us as modern people who have been, let's say, taught to be trapped within a materialist world and think of things as though you could reduce them entirely. It's just a tree. It's just water. It's just sunset. Okay. You can play that game forever and devoid the universe of meaning, and it won't change the fact that your emotions will respond to the meaning when it's presented to you. Right. So noticing that this is just the world that we live in. It's a place of meaning. And if you experience meaning, you confront meaning. Pretending in a way doesn't change the human experience. And this is how we've come to understand the world. And so when people are not ready to admit, as you just did, I understand things better transmitted through a story than I do if it's just presented as a list of factoids, right? Because that's not the world you live in. If somebody walked into an auditorium and looked around for a moment, they probably wouldn't immediately notice that the room is telling them what to do. But in fact, there's a front of the room. There's a podium there. The stage is slightly elevated and all the chairs are facing in the same direction. Guess what? You just entered a narrative space and you're going to participate. That's just the world we live in. And so if that's the power of a story, that the inarticulate knowledge or wisdom that's just staring you in the face, and you can experience it, but you don't really get it, right? Your experiences, even in your own understanding, you think about your past and your memories, or you make plans for the future, or you have a motive and a goal that you're trying to achieve right now. You always think about those things, experience those things, and even recollect those things in the framework of a story. And so it makes sense that story is this thing that's been here forever for us. And you're not going to stop. It's like people are willing to pay so much money for the entertainment industry to tell us stories. Why would you even bother with that? It's like, that's because that's what you're doing there. You're trying to, let's say, embody this identity in front of you. See a superhero doing something and you're like, especially for kids, they're really good at this. They see it and they're like, oh, I go home, I pretend I'm Spider-Man now. Like, that's who I am when I'm doing this game, right? And so it's like, from a very young age, you learn. You want to be something later, you try to embody it now, right? And so it's like, it's the same thing we're doing at church, right? Like, we're trying to embody now what it is we hope to be later. That's what we're doing there, right? And so it's fundamental. It's fundamental to being a human. It's fundamental to having fulfillment and purpose in life, experiencing the positive emotion of establishing and meeting checkpoints and finally accomplishing a goal. All of that's story oriented. You're not going to get away from it. I think if you don't love story, you're missing out on half your life.
Yeah. I think, just real quick, like going back to one thing you were talking about, the materialism stuff. I think it's the fact that we raise these generations, this generation at least, on a materialistic worldview, that they often don't find storytelling, because they're like you were talking about, it's just factoids and stuff like that. They're not looking at the beauty inside of, like, for example, I love sunsets. I look at sunsets like a gigantic painting of God. Every single painting is a new one. It's different, and they're beautiful. But there's also just the facts. That's just the sun, a big giant ball of gas, just, millions and millions of miles away, and just some clouds in the sky. That's it, you know, an atmosphere. But we don't look at it that way. You know, it's something much more. There's something beyond the physical material thing. But the fact that so many people today think very materialistically, it destroys creativity. It destroys what it means to be human. And so I think that's one of the reasons why right now, especially in storytelling, not just for Christians, but just in the world in general, storytelling is a dying art. It's just, you know, like I haven't watched I don't have Disney Plus. I haven't watched a Marvel movie for like I think the last Marvel movie I saw was the latest Spider-Man. That was the last one I saw. Other than that, I haven't watched anything because I just know I can tell very clearly. Yeah, and especially I listen to some critics too who help me save a lot of money, and so they tell me, "Yep, that was garbage," you know. And so, but yeah, absolutely. So I
And I think also the way that because you just explained how the materialism is this, and I said it too. It's like this reduction. It's just this. It's
yep.
just that. And you said we don't think about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
You can though, and if you do, you strip the universe of its enchantment, and then nothing has meaning anymore.
Yeah.
And that's why we're sitting depressed in our basements, wondering why the world is going by, and we're angry at it, though we're the one that's stationary. And it's like, well, but you strip the universe of everything that made it worth doing.
Yeah.
Like life is a thing worth doing. It's like, well, nothing has value.
Yeah.
Like, good luck with that. Like, why? Why would you do that? What motive could you have? That motive is subjective.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, but you're just gonna wither on the vine now. Like, why be miserable? Why trick yourself? It's a trick.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's a trick.
You know, it reminds that's how C.S. Lewis started his book, The Abolition of Man. The first chapter was about the destruction of the imagination of the child growing up, and then that progresses him to this chapter 2, and he takes it to its logical conclusions, and then 3 takes it even further to the ultimate abolition of man, reducing mankind to just this thing to be that's just a utility of society. That's all it is, kind of stuff like that. So that's pretty interesting. So, anyways,
Yeah, good discussion. Chase, I have some questions for you as an author, but before we start with that, I just want to ask you, gentlemen, just a quick question. Like, can you guys name me like your favorite, well, both Christian and non-Christian works of fiction, movies, TV shows, video games, where you would find not necessarily pleasure and excitement because you spend just some time doing what you like, but where you saw especially some biblical aspects when you could see Christ in some character, where you truly enjoyed either reading or playing or watching until the very end, because there was a unifying theme from the beginning to the end. If it's a TV show, from the first to the last episode, you saw clearly biblical, fight between evil and good. You saw some mythology. When I speak of mythology, I mean in a good way, mythology about this cosmic battle and humans being in the midst of everything. Um, can you just, yes, both for myself and for the author, for the audience, if you can, guys, please mention any game, any movie, any TV show, or any novel that you suggest us buying?
I'll let you go first from that one, Josh.
Oh, okay. I the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question, specifically about my passion and what had struck me, there's a trilogy by C.S. Lewis, it's called the Space Trilogy or the Ransom Trilogy. He never gave it a name. It's just 3 separate books that you could read as 3 separate books, or you could read them in the order that he wrote them, because that also makes sense. But it's such a brilliant staging of something that is so difficult, like Chase said, so difficult to put into words, that it needed something like a narrative space to inhabit, right? And so really that book, that series of books, the first of which is called Out of the Silent Planet, is ultimately about that book. What I would say his emphasis, or what he's trying to convey to you, is that there was a bait and switch when this kind of materialism we're describing took hold. And we decided that with our reductionism, we could say it's just this, it's just that. What we did is we looked at space and we said, that's the out there and we're the in here, right? And that's no longer up. It's no longer ascension. It's no longer this ontological hierarchy of reality that you get to participate in levels of being, let's say. Instead, it's just the earth here, and the earth is a globe, right? Obviously, it's going through space, right? Space, emptiness, darkness, right? Darkness and emptiness is what we think of when we hear the word space. Coldness, even, right? And he was like, okay, so then what we did in trying to reduce the world to this material construct is said, okay, that's no longer the heavens that declare the glory of the Lord. Now it's outer darkness, and we traded heaven for hell. He said that was a mistake, and he shows you in this narrative why and how that was a mistake, and even in some sense what he thinks we're missing by looking at it that way. And then the second book is something of a retelling or a pondering, kind of playing gracefully with Genesis 3 and asking perhaps what would have happened. Did Eve resist the snake? For how long? What would have, could the temptation just go on indefinitely? What would have happened? This kind of what would have, and then just using that narrative space to say, what did we lose when they ate and refused to repent, and God had to take the immortality that was available to them in the tree of life? He had to take that away and cast them out of the garden. What did we lose, really? Right. And so that's a pondering about that. It's like all of these things had such biblical themes. But what's remarkable is that it's a story about space travel. It's a guy who gets kidnapped and taken to Mars to be a human sacrifice. Sounds like any sci-fi novel, right? Like, but what he did brilliantly was just underneath that motif, that narrative pattern of sci-fi novel thing, he took that and said, okay, well, what I'm going to do is pack all this theology and philosophy right behind here. And then when you start to dig the layers, you really think about what he's saying. You're like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, so this is this. Oh, it's not exactly that. Oh, wow, I see what he said. Wait a second. And then you start looking it up in the Bible, because he mentions things in the Bible in the book. Start read. Oh, wow, I see what that's really cool. And so it's really impactful to see the way that those things happen. But especially the third book of that trilogy takes place on Earth and gives you this drastic contrast between what's out there and what's in here, and really hammers home exactly the point that in the book that Chase just brought up, which is the abolition of man. He took the essay of abolition of man and made it into a narrative for that third book. And he did it remarkably, and it hammers home exactly what his worry was. And what's really insane about that is he wrote that in the 40s. He finished that trilogy the same year that George Orwell was writing 1984. And so he was doing this. These people were seeing intuition of what was coming toward us down the tubes, let's say, philosophically and education constructs, politically, whatever. He saw these things coming, as did the other authors of his time, and they wrote about it as best as they could without saying, oh, thus saith the Lord, right? Like, it's not like they're necessarily prophets in the biblical sense, but you can see what they were doing was creatively, through the narrative invention they had, reaching forward towards something that we didn't have yet, almost as like a dream or a warning about what was to come. And it seems like the creativity of story and novels and things like that, even the entertainment industry with movies and comic books, like you're mentioning, that is the conduit by which the intuition of human creativity can reach forward and grasp at things that we don't even have yet and be like, aha. And then the philosophers get there later. And we have articulate explanations of what it was that we had the aha about, right? But those things, it's through the arts and creativity and story that we reach forward toward those things, and the artists usually get there first.
I was actually gonna that third one, I think, was That Hideous Strength, right? That's what I was looking up real quick. I was actually going to mention that one. That one's the one from C.S. Lewis. That book, was, I haven't read it in a while, and I need to go back and read it again. But that book actually really inspired me in a lot of ways in what I've been writing a lot in my own novels, about taking the concepts of the abolition of man, and what it does is it takes this philosophy of radical skepticism and reduces it to what it would do to mankind. And so I've kind of taken a lot of that and applying that into my own storytelling and to see what would occur with that. One thing too that I'll just kind of approach in sort of the video game atmosphere. I know we're not supposed to be playing video games, but blah blah blah. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. There was a game I played years ago. It's called Deus Ex, and there's the recent one, which was Human Revolution. I played that game constantly thinking about, and especially today, I didn't know as much then as I do today, but looking back now, contemplating transhumanism and stuff, which was kind of what that game was kind of about. But it's fascinating how, because there's this concept in the whole atmosphere, as it were, of the game, or the worldview of the game, that is very humanistic and is very materialistic. It does give you the options. It's an RPG game, so it gives you the options to choose which way you go, and you know which way I'm going. I'm going to as best as Christian as I possibly can. But there's this concept in the game of transhumanism, of utilizing it's almost like the fourth industrial revolution, utilizing the machines that we create and sort of merging with the machines to evolve into something more than human. That's kind of what the whole idea is about. And but at the same time, it's fascinating because there's a trailer for the game that you can look up. In the trailer, it's got it has the main character. He's dreaming, and it's sort of like he's like Prometheus, going up into the sun, and then just his wings just it burns, and he crashes back down to the earth. Kind of. So there's this romanticizing almost of what is ultimately a materialistic concept. And it's fascinating for me to look at that and see things like that. You see it all over the place, but it's fascinating for me to see that even in a materialistic worldview, there's a sense in which they've got to see it in a metaphysical kind of way. And I think that is indicative of the image of God, that is not satisfied with just the plain facts. It wants to look at its own purely materialistic evolutionary standard, yet in a very metaphysical way, in a meaningful way. And I see that kind of stuff, even in our modern movies and stuff like that. They're always embracing this materialistic. I call it like materialistic evolution. I know there's Christians who believe in evolution, so I'm trying not to step on them. So, but like a very materialistic evolutionary concept, they embrace that stuff, and yet they have to make it in such a way that it isn't simple materialism. It's so all. When I watch these things and I read these things and I play these games and stuff, I just see just the inevitable. It's impossible to avoid it. The need for meaning and purpose, even in, if their worldview is consistent, a purposeless universe. And so I find these concepts in these stories all over the place. It's unavoidable. I'll even listen to like Joe Rogan. And I've heard Joe Rogan, he's all into, atheistic, or at least he calls himself an agnostic, but like materialistic evolution. And he'll even slip up like a Freudian slip, talk about design and of the human body, just certain ways we're designed and stuff like that. That'll just come right out of his mouth all of a sudden. It's like inevitable to avoid. And he talks about meaning and purpose, but if his worldview is correct, then there is no meaning and there is no purpose to any of that stuff. All the stuff he's doing in his podcast, it's really just kind of meaningless, purposeless. So, but those are just things I see. But in terms of, and I'll say this as well. I watched the opening scene from The Lion King because I wanted to. I was testing out something a little bit, and I compare the opening scene to The Lion King to almost anything modern that Disney's doing, and there's like no comparison. Like that opening scene, that opening line from that song, and then they see the sun rising and where you like immediately know you're in for a treat, like right, like immediately when the movie begins. But anyways, The Lion King is I see tons of biblical concepts in The Lion King. Again, just the king himself, a king has been born, Christ is our king, there's hope, and you see all these different animals, right? There's animals from over here, animals from over here, and it's just sort of like Christ bringing the nations, people from different tribes, tongue, people, nation, bringing them all together to worship the king, and so things like that, like seeing those concepts in those stories and stuff, at least in the classics, still in a lot of stuff today, but it is hard to find it today. A lot of it today is just utterly godless, but those are things I pay attention to whenever those are things that at least I like in terms of storytelling and stuff. So anyways, I don't know how exactly I got that onto that, but sort of a broad answer to the question a little bit. So yeah.
Yeah. I didn't plan to answer this question for myself, but I'll just give a few examples myself. There've been amazing number of games or movies and TV shows that I watched or played, or books I read that, in some ways, portray biblical truths. It will take me days and days to remember them, to dissect them, to find their names, to remember the characters and how they remind me of the Bible, which I, may do one day in a special episode dedicated just for that. But I'll give a couple of examples today. First, I don't even know, was I a believer back then? And this was easily 20, 25 years ago. And I should not be revealing my age since I'm a single guy, but still, here we go. So this was a while ago, and I was playing this strategy game on my old PC, and the name of the game was Heaven and Hell. I didn't care about the name of the game or about its genre. What I cared was just doing the missions. So you were given this sort of a priest, and you have to move him from hut to hut, from house to house, from village to village, where he'll be like preaching, even though he'll be just talking whatever you couldn't understand. And the longer he talks, there's a bigger chance, if nothing interrupts you, that a person whom you're talking to, he or she will get converted. And then you send them, and they'll go in the rest of the village or wherever in their clan, and they'll try converting people. And this would be like almost like a rural place or like a fantasy place. Again, this was a long time ago. But then there'll be opposing priests who will be coming among your people and, trying to convert them for their clan, for their religion. And again, I don't know even was I a believer back then, but now I'm thinking, I was like, wow, that video game had so much truth inside itself. Like, it's not just us preaching the gospel. It's not just us, doing this work on the channel, or any of us in our own ministries, in our churches or neighborhoods. But it's also like the opposite side. And when I say the opposite side, they have gazillion branches just in that whole group of whatever is not Christian, it's not biblical. Some of them are cult, some of them are new ages, some of them are just different religions, whatever. So that video game spoke volumes to me. Well, it speaks now when I'm converted. So it's called Heaven and Hell. Well, when it comes, and also I don't like when people put out video games just because they don't have that as a hobby, or they don't understand it, or they don't appreciate. And I'm just mindful how much video game industry makes money. It makes more than sport and movie industry together. And also years ago, they started introducing rewards for the game designers. So it's not just a childish thing that you will give, to your underage kids so they can be just quiet. We're talking about something that has been recognized for a long time as art, not just as a hobby and something that you do to kill time. So I don't like when people put that down. But anyway, when it comes to movies, I'm reminded of this comedy that again came out like easily 15, 20 years ago. I think it's pronounced Idiocracy. Have you guys watched it? In the future, when things happen and everyone is dumbed down, and then the normal person that goes from the current time in the future, he is like so abnormally smart because people are in the future so dumbed down again through propaganda and everything. But also, I'm mindful of one of my favorite movies, even though it never got great reviews. I don't know why. Christopher Bale is in the movie. The movie is called Equilibrium.
Mm.
It's an amazing sci-fi action movie. Again, came out like maybe 20 years ago. In the future, you're not allowed to have feelings. You're not allowed to uh, have a hobby or spend time doing anything that can provoke emotions, meaning art, books, anything. If you're found having any sort of books, any sort of art, you're going to jail and your stuff is going to be burned or replenished or whatever. And Christian Bale is a sort of an enforcer, not police officer, but sort of an enforcer that who finds these people, he puts them to jail. Speaking about Paul, which I didn't think about, but just now crosses my mind, until he finds a puppy, abandoned puppy, and his other comrades from this police enforcement comes and they see the puppy he's holding and they want to take it, but he doesn't want to. Then he started developing emotions toward this puppy, and then he kills them all because of the puppy. And then he starts learning about books, like they're not evil. So the whole movie is this amazing, almost like Matrix like fighting shooting skills, but they're also swords. For me, it's an amazing movie, but it also has this deep spiritual message. So I was like, I never understood how come this movie was not like one of the best movies ever. For me, it is, but not for the wider audience.
Mhm.
So again, Heaven and Hell, Idiocracy, Equilibrium, these are what like one of the many secular works of art that just point me and remind me of the truths of the Bible. And yeah, I'm like, there should be no fear or shame in a life for a Christian that finds everything that is not that is not found in the church or in the Bible to be dirty and evil or wicked. And I actually even emphasized that view by just finishing a textbook, which was my last book for a class, and I've been reading about the Eastern Orthodox Church development issues. And the author is was an Eastern Orthodox priest theologian who was openly speaking about the issues and development in the Church of the East and how the West misunderstands East. And um, by one of the last few chapters of his book was how we, when I say we, I mean generalist Christians, but especially on the West, because sometimes he would gently, not attack, but like, he would like not attack people, but attack their ideas from the West, how they would see East. And he would emphasize, and I think rightly, before I wouldn't see this, he would say how on the West we always see world as something wicked. It's dirty, it's awful, it's disgusting. We need God to come and destroy it, as he said, and start with a new heaven and new earth, right? But then he says, well, while there are verses that they're pointing to us that we should stay away from pollution of the world. But also, let's remember that God so loved the world, that God created the world, that God
Mhm.
said the world is good, how we can find all this beauty and virtues in the world. And the church that serves as a, at least in the Eastern Orthodox view, serves as a sacrament. And for me, even though he didn't use this word, it's almost like a filter in this world, but it's the world, it's people, and God loves this world and people. So there shouldn't be like this fear of the world. Oh, like I used to be this when I was younger Christian. Oh, that's a secular author. This. I shouldn't touch. I shouldn't taste. It was like we come to the point where it's not just um, Christianity. It's more like of um, this ethics that we're bringing in Christianity. Is this morality? It's more of like moralism than Christianity. And I'm not saying we should not guard ourselves. No,
Right.
of course we should be. But I'm just saying how let's say this company's, I don't even know what company, Pure Life. Let's say the owner is a wicked man. Maybe he's not. Maybe it's a board of directors. I don't know, and I don't care. But let's say they're not Christians. There are many people who be like saying you should never buy this, you should never support the business. But I don't know about them because I know that God has put eternity in men's hearts, and I know that through their works of fiction, they may not even be aware of it. Many times in the secular works, of fiction, I can find so many biblical messages, and I just enjoy them. And
Mhm.
that's how I've been approaching, not with like necessarily, oh, this is godly, this is ungodly, because even in godly works, I can find something that I don't agree with. But in the secular works, I also find beauty and truth. Um, but anyway, Chase, I just wanted to ask you before we mention your books and your titles, um, how did you start gaining interest in not just reading but also starting to write and to storytell fiction from Christian perspective?
Well, it started really when I was like in high school, which was, oh my goodness, over a decade ago. Phew, boy. Um, it started back then. I would not pay attention much in school. And I was always the quiet kid who sat in the corner and stuff like that, especially for math and history and stuff like that. I wish I paid more attention, at least in history. But I had my little notebook or whatever, and sometimes even on my own work, I would literally just be drawing on it. I would just draw all these characters and stuff like that. But I had always had this little notebook with me, and I still have them, by the way. I save these things. I never throw these things away. I keep those things for sentimental purposes. But I have these little notebooks, just box stacked full of these notebooks that I had in school, and I would draw these characters. First I started with like drawing Dragon Ball Z characters. And then I started kind of like making up my own Dragon Ball Z characters kind of thing, and then I started sort of getting a little bit into anime and just drawing that. And I started just sort of, I guess maybe my own style of it was focused on humans, like human beings, stuff like that. But I just sort of developed my own little style. I got into like Final Fantasy stuff, and I would just take concepts from Final Fantasy and I'll try to put them into my own little characters and stuff. That's what I would do. And then after a while, I started giving these characters that I drew names. And then after I gave them names, I started giving them backstories. And then I just started writing stories about them. And that's kind of how I sort of transitioned from drawing. I don't draw as much as I used to, which is a shame. I'm trying to get back into it. I'm trying to get into like digital drawing art too. But that's how I started with just making these characters, and I just kind of just I don't know. It just kind of came natural to me. I just love to write about these things, and just make up all these stories about these characters. Now, at that time, I didn't take it very seriously. It was just I think it's just one of those things as a kid that you just sort of you just have this intuition and you don't really think much about it. You just think everybody's kind of like this, whatever. At least that was for me. But it wasn't until like later on that I realized, oh, I guess this is something that a bit of a gift that I have or something like that. Because I meet people all the time who tell me, I don't know how you come up with this stuff, Chase. I'm like, I don't know. It just kind of comes out. But that's what I would do is but like the stories themselves were like I would write these stories and they just were amateurish, really badly. Like if I would go back to like the stories, my those first stories, I'd be like, wow, this is horrible, like just bad. But um, I over the years, of course, I would just learn how to do this and don't do that. If you want to, like things like that. So I would just mature it and mature it. I didn't really take it seriously until like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I started writing the ones that I'm writing right now years ago, but I just never took it very seriously until just the last couple of years. I started to read certain books, and it's funny because a lot of it's not actually novels that have inspired me. A lot of it's actually reading history and learning about history. And I go on, gosh, man, I want to tell this historical story in novel format. Like if I were to tell the story of I want to tell the story of Maximilian Robespierre, one of the most fascinating characters of history, because he's a guy who started out, you might say, as a good guy, and he becomes the embodiment of that quote from the Dark Knight. You either die a hero or you live long and see yourself become the villain. And that's like exactly what happened to the guy. I'm like, that's a story that people need to hear about, like with this guy. So what if I made a character, and I'm kind of working on this. What if I made a character who seems to start out great, and then just goes off the rails, and ends up killing a bunch of people. And people will watch that, or they read about that and they go, wow, that dude is crazy. And then like someone else who might know about Robespierre go, hey, that's funny. That actually tells the story of a guy who actually lived. That's actually based on a true story. The same thing with like communism and things like that. But that's kind of where it started for me. And that's been always sort of my interest, is that taking things that I've learned in like history and going, how can I tell this important historical lesson in a novel format, just to get that to people that they need to know about this stuff. They need to know about, like, there's just so much, like what we were talking about earlier a little bit, but like I was sitting at, I don't want to divert too much, but I was sitting at Chick-fil-A today at lunch, and there's these two girls, clearly high school girls. And it was, I'll just say this, the way they were talking very loud, and it was very difficult for me to focus on what I was trying to do. I was trying to read something, and it was very difficult to focus because they were very loud. They were just laughing, and they were just being just girls who just didn't, you know what I mean. But I'm kind of listening to them because I can't help it, and I just go, gosh, I just wish kids today would come to lunch and talk about more meaningful things than just the silly things that they're talking about all the time. He said this, she said, all this silly stuff. But it's, a lot of it is because these kids lack knowledge. They're not being taught the things that are important. And so what if I could maybe, in the form of storytelling, because as we were talking about earlier, storytelling can convey important truths in a way that's more interesting and entertaining to people, and also taking these kind of complex things and making them easy to understand in the form of storytelling. And so that's another one of the things that got me really interested in stories. But that's how it all really began for me. Today I've decided, like, I realized I got a gift here, and I need to, like, the Lord's given me this gift, and I need to really use it. This is my talent, as it were, and I need to really use this. So I've been like, last couple of years, I would just go and I would start researching about how do you write, like what makes a good story? How do I make this work? How do I create interesting characters and stuff like that? Because the characters I still have, the characters, I still have the same characters, but I've just given them better backstories and just a little bit more depth. Because I remember early on in writing, I'd be like, I don't know what to do next. I don't know what to do. I'm like stuck, I'm at the writer's block thing, like that, and that's something I learned about what causes writer's block. Well, what if I could just basically say it, what causes writer's block is a lack of development of your characters and just a general plot. If you have a character who you don't really know very well as the author, it's going to be difficult for that character to have any real meaning in the story. What are they after? What do they want? You got to think about those things. And so as I develop the characters more, like what they want and stuff like that, and go, that gives me ideas about how to put them in situations that put them in conflict with what they want and what they need and stuff like that. So things like that, I would start to just get more understandings of how to create good stories. And so that's just kind of how it started. And that's kind of where I am today in my writing, so, and then I take that now, and my mom says I'm very annoying to watch movies with, because I take that same knowledge and I'm constantly deconstructing the movies I'm watching. I'm like, that's, yeah, all these silly little things. I just I do that stuff now. So I'm a bit of a movie critic at this point. So, but that's kind of how it got started for me.
Yeah, I remember when you advertised on social media your book. Can you please remind me? Did you write one book and you're writing the second one, or did you publish two books and you're writing the third one?
I published one, and I'm writing the next two right now. So the second one, I write the first one, and I just immediately just start to move on to the next one. And the second one right now is kind of, I'm having some people, well, one person really reading it, and as they're reading that, I'm already working on the third one. So it just goes, man. It just doesn't stop. And so right now I'm technically writing two, so I have one published though.
Okay, can you please tell us about the book you published? What is the name? Is it just a part of the series or it's like standalone? Can you reveal something, but not too much for people who want to buy?
Sure.
And we'll be posting Amazon link to
Yeah.
support you. Yeah, can you just please share anything about your book when it comes to like that you think relevant? What is relevant, and we'll dissect a little bit after that.
Yeah. Yeah. So the it's actually it's not a trilogy. It's just a series of books. And when I say that, I mean I don't know how many exactly I'm going to write. I know it's going to be quite a bit because I got a lot of plans for this whole thing. Um, so the series is just titled Masters of Eldrion, and I first wanted to go with Masters of the Universe, but I'm like, oh, that's already taken. Can't take that one. So I had to come up with something. And so I decided, hey, the world, the fantasy world that this takes place on is a world called Eldrion. So why don't I just name it Masters of Eldrion? And that's not been hasn't been taken, so I just went with that one. So that's the name of like the series. And then they got the sort of the specific book titles that are, that they're their own unique sections in the series and stuff like that. So the one that's published right now, that one is Masters of Elrond, and in the particular book is the Master of Gears. And so that's kind of the whole gist. So I'll just try to be really brief here, but the sort of origin of Eldrion, I got that from kind of just going about designing the lore of my story. And Eldrion basically means elder world in sort of a language in the lore. And it's also, the title is a play on words a little bit, kind of, because it's not just there for the sake of being there, because there's a lot. There's a power grab of certain individuals who want to be the masters of the world, as it were. And so it's just kind of, that's one of the reasons why I titled it that like that. But it's also another reason why it's called Masters of Eldraine is because I developed a different way of talking about the magic people in the world. So not everybody in my world can use magic, only certain individuals. Kind of like in the Avatar series, like there's only certain people who are airbenders or who are benders. So that's kind of what, like, I kind of took that concept and applied it to my story. Only certain people can use magic, and those people typically are called masters. And so there's another one of the reasons why it's called Masters of Eldrion. So the masters, the people, it's all just about those who are. It's about power. To take a lot of concepts from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, about great power and absolute power and stuff like that, and I'm sort of exploring the questions about absolute power, kind of like what the ring represents in absolute power. And like the way I see it whenever I read Tolkien is that these are what I got from reading the Lord of the Rings, is that Tolkien was sort of, one of the things that Tolkien was talking about is there's this, that absolute power is not something that man should have. It should not be possessed by human beings. That God's the one who has the absolute power. And in the world that we live in, power should be distributed so that you avoid sort of like the, what was the people who were trying to build the tower in the Bible to the heavens, like there's that concept of trying to attain that absolute power that only God has, so that's kind of one of the things I'm also exploring in the whole story itself, in the broad general idea of the whole story. Now, it's like you don't see it immediately. It's just kind of like I spend the first two books introducing characters. That's what I'm doing right now. And so the first one right now that's published, the Master of Gears, I'm introducing several key characters. And people ask me, who's your main character? I don't really have a main character. I have just characters that take emphasis at certain points in the story. So you can call them main characters, plural. But one of them her name is Anastaria. She is, and one of the reasons why I made Anastaria is, right now there's a big fuss over strong female characters, strong female leads in mainstream storytelling, stuff like that. Just want to set for the record, I've been trying to do that for years. So, I just haven't been as successful as some people in getting it out there. So I'm not trying to copy anybody's ideas and making a strong female character. But the other thing too, is I'm trying to do it also right, where you make a strong female character who's not just I'm going to show these guys up, kind of thing like that. But like, she's an actual human being, that's a person who has flaws and weaknesses and stuff, and struggles and fails many times, and those kinds of things like that. But Anastasia is one of those characters. She is sort of part elvish, part, I'll just say human right now, just to not confuse people. But she's half and half basically, and she has I'm not going to talk about her own origins yet, because of course you got to read about them. But she gets sent in the Master of Gear. She gets sent on a quest to find and hunt down a mysterious figure who's known as the Black Priest. Now, he's not called the Black Priest because of his skin color. He's called the Black Priest because he uses black magic or dark magic, but seemingly to destroy dark forces. And so that's where he kind of gets the word like that. So the term priest comes from removing darkness, kind of thing like that, And then of course the Black Priest is it's almost like an oxymoron kind of thing like that. It's like the bad priest or whatever sort of thing like that. So he's a mysterious figure, and you don't meet him in the first book. You don't even, you might, well, you're going to meet him in the second book, but you don't meet him in the first book. The first book's about Anastasia getting sent on her quest, but she runs into people along the way who kind of force her to really think about, what she was raised. She was kind of raised very sheltered, and, and not really engaged with the world. And so she's now having to engage the world and try to understand the world that she's coming into. She was raised as an elf, which is sort of like, if I can sort of relate it to our world, it's sort of like someone who, if they were raised like raised Amish almost, and engaging in modern society, having to figure out how to engage with modern society. That's kind of like Anastasia, how she has to engage with the world she lives in. So she runs into a couple of different characters. One of those characters, she's a little girl. Her name is Bastilina. And I hesitated to put Bastilina in the story, but I have plans for Bastilina to use her in certain for certain plot elements that I think are going to be really good going down into the future. But she's a little girl. She's like 13 years old, and she's just now discovering her ability to use magic. And so she meets Anastasia, and Anastasia sort of reluctantly takes her under her wing. And as the story goes, Anastasia begins to grow and care more and more about Bastilina, and treat her more like a little baby sister kind of thing. Of course, Anastasia is going to try and reject that, because she's not supposed to become attached to the humans, as it were. She's not supposed to do that, but she just can't kind of help it, And sort of Anastasia has a conflict within herself about, or is this my human side, is that my weakness, that I'm becoming so attached to these people I'm not supposed to be, but I am, kind of thing like that. It's that kind of what she struggles with throughout the story. But so Anastasia, along the way of the story, Anastasia is going to she's going to learn a little bit more about who the Black Priest is. And what I want to do is I want to present him as a very mysterious figure, who's like so mysterious that you go, is he even really a guy, or is he just a legend that people created? Is he really more of an idea? He kind of, that kind of stuff like that. That's kind of what I'm hoping can be conveyed throughout the book about who this character is. And then of course you're going to find out more in the next book about who this character is, this mysterious figure. Because he does play a very important role in the whole story. And I can't get into all that stuff yet, as much as I want to, but I can't get into all that stuff. So that's kind of the main idea of where it's starting. It's starting with Anastasia and her journey across what's called Enusia, the land of Enusia. So it's her journey across all that. By the way, I have to give Nicola props or kudos for giving me the link to that Incarnate website, which is I just like dove into that thing, and I was just making all these little maps, and I was like, oh, I love this thing. They're constantly updating it too, which is really cool. That was a really cool investment. So that's where I'm hoping I can take the maps I make in there, and I'd love to put them in the book, so that like what Tolkien did, so you can just kind of you can follow along and see where the characters are going, and you can even look beyond just where they go to all these different cities and stuff, or lands and everything like that. But one other thing I wanted to talk about real quick is the general world that this takes place in. This takes place in, it's fantasy world, but it's not like medieval fantasy stuff. It takes place in an industrializing society, sort of like so if you want to think about it in our current time, think about it like the industrial revolution with magic in it. So there's a lot of, I incorporate a lot of steampunk elements in it. I love steampunk stuff. I have that clock back there up on the camera's way. I built that. You can get it on Amazon. They give you all the pieces and you put it all together. It's a very steampunkish kind of clock. It's got all the gears and whatnot. I have so much fun building that thing. But I love this. I love steampunk based clocks and stuff, all the gears, and just watching all of it. It's just so cool. But anyways, so it's this very steampunk kind of world. It's a world developing into a modernizing age, almost like a 19th or kind of 19th century sort of idea. And then so what I'm doing with that is I'm presenting questions about what does an industrializing society, what does that mean for mankind? What does that put human beings? Because this was some questions that I think we should ask about the industrial age. Because when we think about the Industrial Revolution, I mean, in many ways that gave rise to things like communism. And so I want to ask questions like that. What is it? And as technology and science develops, their ability to sort of see things microscopically and on a more mechanical level, what does that mean for us when you can now look at a human being in almost a mechanical way? What does that mean for us as human beings? So these are concepts that I'm sort of exploring in the story as well. It's not just a fantasy story that you're just following these characters as they struggle, but there's a lot of philosophical elements. What it means to be human in a world that is modernizing, and so that we can take. So hopefully you look at that and you ask those questions about us today and where we are today. Like, what does it mean for us today when we discover these new technologies and stuff like AI, for instance? What does that mean for us as a people, as human beings? Where does that put us whenever we discover something new or new revolutionizing technology? Where does that leave us as human beings? So those are sort of some of the concepts that I'm exploring as well. Sort of subtly in the beginning, but they become more prevalent and more prominent as the story grows, as it were. So long answer for all that, basically.
Yeah, I have one more question that is individually for you, and then I have, when it comes to this section, a couple more questions that both of you can get involved. But I just have one more individual question for you, Chase. For me as a future author, I mean, in a way, I am author, but I'm not published author. And I don't know about every author out there, but I was curious about you. For me, it's inevitable when I'm writing, not just about the main character, it can be in any character. It's inevitable for me to embed some of my character traits, good or bad, funny or sad, anything. It's impossible for me not to embed something in this character, so at least in one character, the way I'm in real life. Even though one time when I publish it and people read it, those who don't know me personally, they won't know that.
Yeah.
But I know as an author. So I was just curious, like when you're developing, your stories and your characters, how much of all of that plot, all of these fictional beings, they can be humans or of another races like elves or dwarves or anything. How much of you, of your heart, of your emotions, of your soul, of your personality are you taking and just implementing in your work?
Yeah, I'd say about a good solid 70%. No, I'm just kidding. But I take little bits. I think it's inevitable, like you said, it's inevitable. Some of you is going to end up in something in the story, like especially a person in the story. So for example, one of the things about me that I put into the story is the character I mentioned earlier, Basilina. She's grown up in a very closed off world as well, which is kind of where I came from. I came from a world in Christendom that's just very, very walled off, like almost borderline King James only kind of stuff, And as I got older, of course, again, I still go to a non-denominational church, by the way. But my former pastor, I mean, the kind of standard, their eschatology kind of concepts like that. And I'm not disagreeing with it right now, of course. But my point is that that's where I was raised in, And as I got older and I began to sort of read more into history and the history of Christianity, I began to ask, wow, I mean, we're just tiny, there's just this huge world of I've never knew about. No one ever told me about the church fathers and all this stuff in history. No one told me about any of that stuff. And then it's not just Baptists, but there's Lutherans, there's Presbyterians, there's Eastern Orthodox. There's all these different worlds of Christendom out there. And so I began to sort of learn more about them. I began to realize, maybe it's not, the answers to a lot of these things aren't as simple as I thought they were. There's church history too. It's kind of messy, so it's just the way it is. And so I sort of put a little bit of that in Basilina's character. When the story begins for Basilina, she starts out going to kind of the same kind of church, of like a fundamentalist church. This guy who's just going up there and he's just like, those the fundy Baptist guys who are like Steven Andersons of the world, who just, Josh is over there laughing. That's kind of like what this guy is, but he's not like yelling or anything like that. But he's just acting in a very controlling manner, in this little sermon that he's doing. He's kind of like telling which you'll read is he's like looking at the audience, you better not stray away. And in other words, he's saying you better not turn from my authority, basically. That's kind of like what he's basically saying. But Basilina's sitting in the audience kind of going, and she's in the church that they're in, when you read it, hopefully you see this, but it's a very plain looking building. I'm not against, just kind of common churches, like very contemporary looking churches. Although I do love the beautiful appearances of cathedrals and stuff like that, the basilicas. I just love them. I just think they're beautiful. I like those concepts because they do kind of bring you into a sense of the heavenly things, like the metaphysical things. That's what I love about them. That's why I would love to go and see all those historical churches over in Europe. I would really love to go visit all those, and I'd be just taking all kinds of pictures and stuff. But so she's kind of in this very plain building. It was almost sort of like an abandoned building that they just turned into a church, but there's these plain windows. There's nothing interesting going on in the windows. Everything is just so plain. And Basilina is bored out of her mind as the sermon's going. She just can't even focus on anything that the guy is saying. It's just not interesting for her, She wants to explore more, and there's like a cathedral across the street. She wants to go to this cathedral. She's never been inside it. She wants to go inside of it. She hears the bell ring at noon every single day, but she's always wondered what was inside of it. And so I put a little bit of me inside of her, and this desire to see what's beyond this little world that she lives in. She wants to go see mountains. She's never seen mountains before. And so Anastasia comes along, of course, and basically scoops up Basilina. The way this story happens, you got to kind of read about it. But I'm just simplifying. And Anastasia takes Basilina with her, and she doesn't kidnap her, by the way, because she's technically an orphan. So, but Basilina joins Anastasia on this journey, and she begins to learn about the world beyond the world that she's normally acquainted with. And it's both exciting and it's also terrifying at the same time. Like for me, learning about the world outside of my little Christian bubble was both exciting and terrifying at the same time, because I realized, oh man, like there are things where I went, like, how do I figure this out? I don't know how to, like, the kind of struggling a bit here with how to figure out how to deal with this kind of stuff, these issues and stuff that were never raised to me before. So there's a bit of a scariness to it as well. And so Basilina is going to encounter things that are wonderful and beautiful, like mountains, but she's also going to encounter terrifying things that are going to scare, things are going to threaten her, things that want to hurt her, and things like that. So she's got to learn to deal with those things. But she's also really realizes that it's not just black and white as I've come to learn. It's not, everything is not just black and white. It's not, you know, in the soteriological debates, it's not just Arminianism versus Calvinism. It's not that simple. You know, like I used to think that. I'm like, okay, it's not really that simple, you know, and so it's not black and white. And so she kind of learns that and has to navigate that, figure out how to navigate that stuff. So I put a lot of myself in that character in that sense. I do a lot of it as well with the other characters that I just can't get into right now. But one character, Stratos, who you're going to learn about in the second book, I put a little bit of myself into Stratos as well. In many ways, Stratos is cowardly, and kind of reflects a little bit of me, and you know, being very cowardly and learning how to be to take responsibility and be a man. And I do a little bit of that with another character who Stratos encounters. His name is Coven. He's a young kid as well, and he has a twin sister named Tanis. But Coven as well has to learn how to kind of grow up. And throughout the story, he's a kid in the beginning, but by the end of the story, he's going to be an adult. But he's going to have to grow up and learn to take responsibility and be a man, kind of thing like that, you know? So those are things that are really dear to my heart, because those are things that I've learned about in the past couple of years about growing up, being a man, taking responsibility of your life and stuff. And so I do put a lot of that into these characters, not just to sort of show, you know, hey, here's a little bit of me. Not that most people are going to really notice that, but also just show lessons, moral lessons, I think, that people need to learn about. Young kids should learn about. That's why I put more like younger characters in the story, so that kids can relate to them a little bit more. Right? It used to be mostly just adult characters, which I guess is another one of the ways I put myself into the stories, because it's just adults. You know, I'm an adult. You know, I would just sort of make every character an adult, kind of thing like that. So I thought, you know, maybe I should put some. I want to something that kids who may read the books can identify with and learn from the stories or the experiences of these child characters and stuff, and how to grow up, basically, you know, how to be a kid, but also how to eventually, you got to grow up and you got to take responsibility, those kinds of things. So that's kind of how I put a little bit of myself into the story and my characters.
Man, that's so cool. Okay, next question first for Josh and then for you, Chase. So, for those who don't know, Josh and I, we're not published authors yet, even though that those things may come along, you know, our life and calling God has for us. But Josh, you're using a lot of storytelling on both of your YouTube channels. So I'm not talking necessarily when you guys talk about systematic theology, dogmatic theology, and things like that. But you know, when you have topics that are outside of those spheres of theology, also whenever you're preaching, because I know that you told me that sometimes you preach, inevitably both in YouTube and in sermons, we use illustrations, we use stories. So I wanted to start with you when it comes to the next question: is how fulfilling do you find whenever you work this type of ministry, but also art, how fulfilling you find whenever you find yourself as a storyteller and you give to people illustrations, especially when it comes to the work of fiction? How is that applicable both to you as a preacher and as a YouTube owner of actually two channels?
Well, that's a really interesting way of putting that. I think I find a greater level of fulfillment in using story or in using illustrations or analogy or whatever, when, especially in the sermon setting, because I have got a privilege to do public speaking and things like that, and even covering for my pastor behind the pulpit of my own church, which is a huge privilege. And those were really impactful experiences for me. Not only just that, like just in general, knowing that you could be trusted with being in the pulpit of the church that you attend, and that your pastor's like, hey, I need you to step up and do this thing. That's a ridiculous privilege. But also, when you're standing up there, you're speaking to all of the people they're sitting with you in the congregation. They're not up on stage preaching at you. And then yet all of a sudden me, one of the youngest people in the room, is now the instructor, and everything that I'm saying is being listened to in a way that I can't even anticipate how it's going to land for them in some real sense. And yet if I use an experience that I have, a testimony, which is a story, by the way, if I use a testimony to illustrate a point, or if I allude back to a testament that was given by the Old Testament prophets, or by Moses, or the story of David and Jonathan, and and these characters that we meet throughout the narrative of the Old Testament, or if I use an analogy of my children to establish something, and I tell a story about what happened to my kids, oftentimes it's not these remarkable mic drop boom kind of moments where you say something really deep and succinct and everybody in the room goes, oh, aha. It's usually when you've said something really deep and remarkable, but in the guise of a narrative, because that's what's going to land for somebody in a much more immediate sense. And seeing the face of or aha, or wait a minute, that kind of reaction displayed on somebody's face, that's one of those things, because now you know that you're sharing a kind of revelation, and it's not something, it's almost like your spirits are hugging each other. You know what I mean? Like, that's what it feels like to me, to be in that situation, let's say as a preacher, and see somebody really just, oh yeah, oh okay, and then now they have a new piece of what you're talking about, and that kind of layers over, and you can begin to create a real depth that you can share with one another. There's a lot of really cool things that I like about the people in my church, and the family environment, and the feeling of welcome that you get when you're there, but also having the experience, which is rather unique, of being in front of the congregation and speaking to them, and having the people who are, let's say, sometimes 2-3 decades my senior, come up to me and say, I have no idea how I didn't know what you just said, or that really, I had somebody after a sermon that I gave, which is really silly, I used the example of, one of my children is bigger than the other. Does that mean one of them's more valuable than the other? No. So why is it we look at the size of the universe and think for some godforsaken second that, oh, I must be meaningless, I must be insignificant because of my physical size? That is the silliest thing I've ever heard. And this guy, who had literally just lost a grandson or a nephew who was very, like, an infant, I believe, an infant, if not a toddler, and they passed away, and he was just like, he didn't know how to deal with that. He was like, it just, for whatever reason, me making a silly size comparison between my children, God granted his heart a comfort and a peace of knowing that child still had infinite value irrespective of its size, and that God didn't love it any less, and God's mercy was for the child. Like, just so many layers of peace was granted to his heart because I made a joke about the size of my children. You know what I mean? We don't realize what these things are going to give to somebody. And that's, for me, that's the fulfilling part, is seeing the interpersonal impact of being able to show rather than just tell.
Yeah. Oh, am I up?
Yep. I was just about to say Chase.
So. Yeah. What was the question again? I'm sorry. I just wanted real.
Well, how fulfilling do you find as a Christian author, as a fantasy author? How fulfilling you find this type of work?
Oh man, it really, it does give me a real purpose in life, because honestly, for one thing, I think about, man, I don't know what I'm really good at other than this. I'm not good at a lot of things. So, I, in a certain sense, I'm like putting all my eggs in this basket, which is a risk in and of itself. You're not guaranteed success in the author business, but it's fulfilling because, in a lot of what Josh was saying, is because I really believe that and I've believed this for years, and I'm actually kind of encouraged. I am seeing more Christians starting to see this now, which is great. But storytelling, the power of storytelling, people don't really, at least yet, understand it, just how much it is. For example, I remember like months ago, I was eating lunch with some friends from church on Sunday. We were talking about movies, movies that we liked, movies we didn't like, stuff like that. And of course, again, like I was saying, I've sort of become uh, the quintessential movie critic in my family, and difficult to watch movies with because I'm just constantly critiquing them as this like that character arc wasn't very compelling and blah. I just do that stuff, but I don't do it because I don't like. I'm just being a nag, but like I want to see a good story. Like I love storytelling enough to critique bad storytelling or mediocre storytelling when I see it. Kind of do better. Like I got somebody who's editing my books right now, and she's like, she's giving me that kind of criticism. She wants it to be good. Sometimes I gotta hear stuff I don't want to hear, but you gotta rehear that stuff, if you want to make a good story. But we were talking, and one of the ladies I was with, she just basically told me, she's like, I don't think about stuff. I just want to watch a good flick. And I was just kind of like, see, I disagree. I don't agree with that kind of watching movies. If you just want a good flick, well, you just really just want to be entertained for no real reason at all. It's just, I mean, I don't want to. I'm not trying to say that she's like got a drug problem, but a lot of times this is one of the reasons why people just do drugs. I just want a good hit. That's just it. Kind of. I don't want nothing meaningful, whatever. So I'm not trying to compare that to her because she's a really nice lady, But I just think that we can just do that to movies. Like I'm not looking for anything interesting. Not looking for. I just want a good. I just want a lot of explosions and stuff like that. Whatever. I want a lot of kissing and blah 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 and just whatever. Um, so, but storytelling is so much more than that. Real good storytelling is it. I'll put it this way: going back to The Lion King, one of my favorite movies, all-time favorite movies. I watched that movie when I was a little kid, and today it still resonates with me. That opening scene resonates with me. The scene where Mufasa dies is still one of the most absolutely heart-wrenching scenes for me to watch, um, because it impacted me as a kid. It had an effect on me. That's why we love to go to like Disney and Disneyland and Disney World to experience these stories almost come to life, almost like see them in real, in much more immersive ways. But to just to it to be to there's something in the human intuition that wants to go beyond, like we were just talking about, the material elements of the world, to step into a fantasy world, to step into something that just goes beyond what our typical mundane lives, what they can be, and so um, storytelling can it if movies like that, some like 20-30 years later, still impact me. Think about that for this generation of kids, how they can be impacted by storytelling, good storytelling and stuff. My nephew right now, he's a little 2-year-old guy, and there's this movie he loves. It's a Disney movie. It's not one of the weird Disney movies, thank goodness. But it is a Disney movie, and he loves the movie. And he's always trying to sing the songs in the movie. I don't know what it is. I forgot what it's called. I'm not really into modern Disney stuff, but he loves to try to sing the theme song to that movie, and that just sort of shows that story has an impact on him, and that's going to resonate with him probably his whole life. It's almost like stories just sort of brand themselves onto our minds, and sometimes they do it without us even really knowing it. Um, and so I look at that and I go, well, I want to do that, but I want to do that with real meaningful stories, stories that are like Lord of the Rings. That's another example, by the way. When I watched I remember, I mean, I was in my parents' bedroom on their tiny little TV box watching the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring for the first time with my family in their bedroom. And that very last scene with Frodo and Sam, and they're on their way to Mordor, and the music playing. That was one of the most amazing endings of a movie I've ever seen in my life. It blew me away, and I was sitting there going, "It's ending? Where's the rest of it? I want to watch the rest of it. I want to see where this goes." And then my dad was like, "You got to wait till they come out with the next movie." And I remember that was like the longest year of my life waiting for the next one to come out. I was just like, I can't wait for the next one to come out. I want to see it, and I wanted to watch it in theaters and everything. But I remember that. I mean, that last scene just blew me away. It was so inspiring. And so these stories, man, they what do these do to kids, and what they can do to not just kids, but people in themselves. It can the darkened imaginations that we're living among. You could tell a great story, and it could just boom, just shed light in those dark minds. I love, again, I'm a little tough on movies because I love good movies. I love tough on stories. I want to be blown away. I want to watch something that blows me away, that just makes me go. It's like one of those things. Like if you go see something in the movie theater, and like when it's over, you're like, I got to return to my boring life now. Like it's over. I want to go watch it again. I just want to stay here, and I want to stay in this world, kind of like that. So that's why I love doing this. That's what I really want to do is I want to make memorable characters. I want to make memorable stories, like Tolkien's world, a story that can go on. Like you can read it generations from now, and it would still have an impact, kind of thing like that. Those are the kinds of things that I want to make. So, anyways, that was kind of another long-winded answer, but sort of my answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. And we're almost done for tonight, so I have one more question for both of you gentlemen, and I'm looking forward in a few weeks when we'll be chatting about the sequel of this episode, because I have much more questions to ask you, right? So my last question for both of you is, Josh, for you, and Chase, for you, but in different settings. Josh, for you, when it comes to the both preaching when you use storytelling, but also storytelling in the YouTube channel, and Chase, for you as a fantasy book author. Do you guys find support from your local church for the YouTube channel or for the books? Do you find any personal Christian friends who would object or support you? They maybe read the novels, or Josh, in your case, if they would like listen YouTube videos, even though they're not maybe into that topic or those topics, but they would listen just to support you. Have you found in your local congregations, for both of you, encouragement, guidance, understanding, any type of support for your work, that you're like, oh, I'm doing Lord's work God's way? In a way, this is my ministry. This is the gift that God gave me. I'm not burying it. I'm not putting it in the ground, but I'm using these talents to grow and hopefully to glorify God.
Well, I can say, just calling back to what I was talking about a few moments ago, is actually one of the larger, more memorable impacts that I've had with the encouragement of the people in my church was my pastor himself asking me to cover for him more than once from the pulpit of our church, and not even just for a Bible study, but for like a Sunday, for like it's one of those things where I'll never forget that. I'll never take for granted that it's like it feels almost as though that was a story. Like it's just like that was a myth that I thought of, or a dream that I had, that just felt so satisfying. But it actually happened. Like I actually got to do that. And I think there's not a lot of things that I feel like could really directly compliment my heart more than that. But also I am privileged to have people in my church who, let's say, share interests. I have a brother named Ricky Sowell who lives near my house, and I usually am his ride to church. He's been coming to church with me for a long time. He actually was one of the people who was consistently coming and doing Bible study with me when I was leading a Bible study, almost 8 years ago, I guess. It was a long time ago. and he's been around me for a long time. We've gone through a lot of different discussions, things like that. And he's got a really interesting way of hearing, thinking, and asking questions. And so he's pushed me, encouraged me a lot. One of my favorite guys at my church, who unironically looks a little bit like me, and sometimes people call us the wrong name. And so when I go to church, I'll say, "Hey, what's going on, Josh?" And he'll say, "Hey, how you doing, Cody?" And he'll give me a hug. And so that he also is one of those people that I find myself almost inevitably talking about just the deepest things almost instantaneously. He also is somebody who's encouraged and enticed by a lot of what I'm thinking about, and is really like, he makes me feel heard in a very unique way also. But he's one of those people that when he's listening to what you're saying, you can tell he really listened, because he has something like that you didn't expect him to say in return. And so that also is a really great encouragement. But also there's a really awesome couple that started coming to my church a couple of years ago, who found out that I have participate in making podcasts, and they were like, "Hey, like, I do a lot of drive time. I'm gonna start listening to your pod." So they like binge listened to all, like, so many episodes, and it was ridiculous. They came to church the next couple of weeks, and they kept just, "Oh, I remember when you said this, I listened to this episode." It's just like, whoa, you know what I mean? And then to let that kind of sink in for a moment and recognize that, like, you do a podcast episode like this and you start to see views begin to happen. Let's say you have on some, even on your episodes here, Nico, you got some of them that are over 200 views, and it's like, 200 people is a sizable congregation, my friend. You just started getting some reach, and it's like that is one of those things that it starts to really sink and hammer home when you see somebody who's in your local congregation, who's in your church family, and they're like, "Hey, I heard when you said that thing, man, that was impactful. I'll remember that. Thanks for saying that. It was worth saying." That's what it feels like they're saying to you. That was worth saying. Thanks for that. Like, that is really great. It is really great encouragement. And just on the topic of this, not to guilt anybody, but if you don't, please start encouraging and complimenting your pastor. He gets nitpicked enough. Tell him the good things that you heard. Let him know that what he said impacted you. Give him encouragement. I promise he needs it. There's all kinds of people who are trying to do the Lord's work and are really just starving for that moment of gratifying. Yeah, what you're doing matters. Yeah, it really is making a difference. Like, we need to hear that as ministers, as preachers, as people who are invested in serving the body. We need to be lifting one another up. And it's not just the people who are the preachers who should be lifting you up. That guy's got a load. Help him out. Tell your preacher what he did right. Compliment your pastor, your priest, whatever. Tell the people who are the deacons in your church, "And I noticed when you were serving this purpose, that really touched my heart when you did this thing." Or, it's like at my church, they have ministries where sometimes when something bad happens, there are women who are in the church who have volunteered to be like, "When tragedy strikes, I don't want you to have to go out of your way to remember, what am I going to do for dinner? What am I going to do for this?" They call it Martha's Ministry, and they'll come and help serve at your house and bring you dinner and feed your family and things like that, to make sure you're taken care of, because life is hard and sometimes you're just out, and it's like, those kind of things make a big difference. But sometimes when we're making a big difference, we don't notice, because our fruit isn't for us. Our fruit is for other people to taste and eat, right? Like, so we often don't realize how heavy of a production our tree is making, let's say. And that is something that people honestly need to hear more of. You don't have to be a televangelist to make a huge impact. A huge impact can happen for one person, and one generation from now, they'll be Billy Graham. You have no clue what you're doing. You really don't. And sometimes we just need to be told. So I encourage people to encourage more.
Very well said. And I try to also, on that note, I like to, after, service, I like to talk to my pastor whenever I get a chance. He talks to a lot of people, so I don't always get to talk to him, but I always like to, whenever I get a chance, to say, "Hey, this, what you said in the sermon, at this point, it really made me think about this, and I can just see it in his face. I mean, he loves that. He loves when people talk to him about that stuff. I mean, most people, it's easy for a lot of people to just go up and say, "Hey, Pastor Hector," and then they talk about something like, "I just got a new something, I got a new car," or whatever, and that's great, but what'd you get from the sermon? Kind of that, that stuff like that. That's what I'm always thinking about, But yeah, that's very true. It is very important. Your pastor's there. And he he always looks like he's doing swell, but a lot of times, man, they are kind of hanging on by a thread, and struggling a lot with stuff, so that is really important. For me, I don't get like, so I gotta make sure I'm clear here. I don't get a ton of support, but at the same time, I also sometimes am my own worst enemy. So sometimes I don't really broadcast what I'm doing. So I don't want to be like, yeah, nobody likes to support me. Well, you don't really talk about it too much. It's at the same time. So that's one of my faults. But um, it's a very interesting question because while I am seeing more people and Christians interested in Christian storytelling. Um, there are still some who like, this is one of the things that kind of, for me, that kind of led me to sort of really not like a lot of the hyper cessationism stuff. I was talking to a buddy of mine about this with storytelling, because there's a lot of people who just say, all we just do is just preach the gospel. That's all we do. And yeah, that's true, but I don't think God has restricted the way we share the gospel to just with, the Bible itself, just say repent and believe, but through creative ways, through the arts. And that's especially for a lot of these guys, I'm your Nicole. I'm sort of your token reform guy in the whole group thing. So that's kind of where I typically hang out. But
used to be Sean, but he gave up.
yeah, I noticed that too. Yeah, but so I'll just be the token reform guy. But I I see a lot of people in the reform community just become so just really scared of it's sort of like, and again, I'm not trying to pick on anybody in particular, but they kind of do the John MacArthur thing. It's just kind of just all we're just doing is just preaching the gospel, like the Bible. That's all we're doing, kind of like that. And anything else is just sort of like a waste of time, kind of thing like that. I've called it sort of this hyper cessationism thing. Like my buddy put it like this. It's like sort of mocking that idea. Chase, don't you know all we got to do is just preach the Bible to him. Just got to hammer the Bible at him and stuff like that. And not to say that I don't want to get the Bible to them. That's not what I'm trying to say. But the point is that there are so many creative ways in which we can convey biblical truths, not just in, hitting people with Bibles and stuff like that all the time, getting on their level. What does Paul say, to the Hebrew, or I'm a Hebrew, to the Greek, I'm a Greek. He sort of gets on the same level of the people that he's talking to reach them with the gospel message, to eventually get them to that point. And so it also strikes me as interesting, especially if, in people in the crowds that I typically hang out in, because the reformers themselves loved art. They were all into art. They found art beautiful. They saw art as a way to convey gospel truths. And so we should, as Christians, really be taking just going crazy with that stuff, just be getting so much into art. That's how we got to where we are today in the Western world and Western culture. That's kind of how a lot of it developed, was through the arts of painting, and of storytelling, novels. We really mastered that, and we've given it over to the secular world, but that's another subject. But I am noticing, all that to say, there is an increase in interest in storytelling around me. I was telling Josh, I met this young girl at my church, she sort of writes little stories herself. And when I hear about that, when I hear about kids who are want to, whether this is a little bit of art here or a little bit of storytelling there, I want to just jump on that immediately. And just as soon as I hear that, I'm going to go, really? You do? You I don't do like that. It's kind of creepy, but be really, wow, that's fascinating. I would love to read your stuff. And I do that because when I was younger, and I was just getting into storytelling and stuff. No one really paid much attention to it. And so that's one of the reasons why I guess I kind of just sort of just treated it like it didn't really mean much, and they didn't really put a lot of investment in it. But I don't want that mistake to happen to young people today. Like if a kid at church has an interest in storytelling, I want to like be like immediately go, that's cool, dude. I want to invest. Like I want to I want to help you make it even better. Like just show that kid that what you're interested in matters and someone cares about that. Like if it's just me, who cares? That's somebody. And I really care. I am interested in reading your stuff and seeing what you got going. And I would love for them to take it seriously, because as we've been talking about, this stuff is really, really important in our culture today. I like to put it this way. The Bible was written by the greatest storyteller ever. There's no reason why Christians should not be great storytellers. That should be a given. And
Amen.
yeah, that should be a given. And I feel like I'm seeing right now an increased interest in that, and I love that. Especially given all the woke stuff going on. I think Christians are starting to wake up to realizing, hey, you know what? We can do better than this, and we can, and we should. So I'm really encouraged by that, to seeing more of that. So I am seeing more people interested in stories, and I have some friends from church who are like, who are very interested in what I've been writing. I'll tell them about it and stuff like that. We talk about storytelling and stuff, and also knows encouraging too, because they seem really, really interested. I'm like, have you ever thought about writing your own stories and stuff like that? I try to encourage them on that as well. Just doing little things like that. So yeah. That's my answer to that.
Well,
Very
gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. I'm looking forward for the next episode where we'll be talking about more stuff that we couldn't cover tonight.
Yeah.
But I'm thankful for your time. I'm thankful for your passions. I'm thankful that both of you, are not, like I said, just covering, digging and covering and hiding your talents, but using for God's kingdom. So, I'm looking forward with you, Chase, to continue writing your saga and one day maybe start even a new one. And with you, Josh, and me, I hope also God will give us favor of publishing our own books in the future. But until then, to at least, work on both of our channels and just, following the vision God gave us. So with that being said, gentlemen, again, thank you for your time. Have a wonderful weekend. Looking forward to see you next time, and God bless you.
You too, man. Thank you for having me.